Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a brand new method which will handle the update of the canvas group. So let's go and let's create a brand new private void, and let's call this something like update canvas group. And this method will require a couple of parameters. The first one is the state, and the second one is the canvas group. So the only thing that we are going to do inside of this method is we are going to do a switch statement, and we are going to switch the state that we send in. So if our case is equals to true, then let's make the canvas group visible and active. So let's simply say canvas group dot alpha equals to 1. Then canvas group dot block raycast equals to true, and canvas group dot interactable equals to true. Now let's copy this, let's paste it right here, and if the state is false, then the alpha value needs to be 0, and block raycast and interactable both needs to be set to false. And that is all we need to do within this method. So inside of the open method, let's simply call update canvas group. For the state, let's put it to true, and for the canvas group, let's use UI.list canvas group. So now let's go and let's create a brand new public void, which is going to be the close method. Let's first of all copy this entire thing to disable, which in this case to enable the functionality of the game so that we can actually move with our player. So let's simply say first person controller dot enabled equals to true. We don't want the cursor to be visible, and the lock state needs to be, for example, locked. Alright, so now the next thing that we need to do is we need to update the canvas group. The state needs to be false, and the canvas group is going to be UI.list canvas group. Alright, so now the next thing that we need to do is we need to start creating all of the display methods. So to display a node, display a page, and so on. So the first method that we will create is going to be a private method, and let's call this method something like display node. And for the parameter, we need to send in the node. So now the next thing we need to do, or the first thing we need to do within this method, we need to check if the node that we send in is equals to null. Then we simply need to return from this method. If the node is not equals to null, what we need to do is, first of all, we need to update canvas group. The state needs to be true, and the canvas group is going to be UI.node canvas group. Then the active node needs to be equals to the node that we send in as a parameter, and then we need to display the page. So let's create a brand new private void, and let's call this method display page, and as a parameter we need only one, which is going to be the index of the page. So let's simply say page. Alright, so the first thing that we need to do within this method is we need to update the read button. So let's simply say UI.readButton.interactable is going to be equals to active node dot pages, and the index is going to be the page index that we send in as a parameter. And if the page type is equals to texture, then the read button is going to be enabled. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is, first of all, we need to do a switch statement. So let's simply make a switch statement, and what we need to switch is the active node dot pages, the page, and what we need to switch is the type. Alright, so if our page type is equals to text, then what we need to do is we need to say that UI.page.sprite is going to be equals to default page texture. What we need to do then is we need to say that UI.textObject.text is going to be equals to ActiveNote.pages.text. And that is all we need to do. So now if our page type is texture, then we need to say that UI.page.sprite is going to be equals to ActiveNote.pages.texture, and UI.textObject.text is going to be equals to an empty string. And the last thing that we need to do at the moment is update the UI. Alright, so after we updated the page content, we need to call this update UI method to update all the rest of the UI elements. So let's go and let's create a brand new private method, which we can call something like update UI. And within this method, the first thing that we need to do is we need to update the previous and the next buttons. So let's simply say UI.previous button.interactable is going to be equals. Alright, so what we need to do is we need to check if the current page is equals to 0. If that's the case, then we want to make this previous button to be invisible. But we can't just use this as the state, because that will return true. So what we need to do is we need to simply turn this into the opposite state, which is going to be false. So if the current page is equals to 0, then this will be true. Then the opposite state is going to be false, which makes this button not interactable. Alright, so now let's go and let's update the next button. So let's simply say UI.nextButton.interactable is going to be equals to the opposite state of current page being equals to the ActiveNote.pages.length -1. Alright, so the next thing that we need to update is going to be the subscript. So let's create a brand new variable and let's call this use subscript. So if ActivePage.type is equals to PageType.texture and ActivePage.subscript use subscript is equals to true, then we are going to use the subscript. So let's say UI.read button.alpha is going to be equals to use subscript. If that is true, then what we need to do is we need to check if we are reading the subscript. If that's the case, then the alpha is going to be 0.5. And if that's not the case, then the alpha is going to be 1. And if we are not using the subscript, then the alpha is going to be 0. Alright, so then let's update the canvas group, which is going to be read subscript, and the canvas group is going to be UI.subscript group. Then what we need to do is we need to update the lines, and the lines.enabled is going to be equals to ActivePage.displayLines. Alright, so let's go back to our displayNote method, and in here then we are calling displayPage method. For the page index, let's simply put 0, so the first page in the array. So now what we need to do is we need to create a couple of more methods, which is going to be the private void, actually not a private but a public void, and this is going to be next, as well as the public void previous. And we also need to create a public void, which is going to be read. So of course these buttons are going to be used on click events. So whenever we're going to press on the next arrow, we are going to call this method, and so on. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to say that the current page is going to be +1, What we need to do now is we need to check if active node dot pages current page dot type is not equals to page type dot texture. Then we need to say that the read subscript is going to be equals to false, and else if a read subscript is true, then we're simply going to update. We are going to call this method called update subscript. Alright, so let's go and let's implement this private method that we can call something like update subscript. And this method is going to be extremely simple. It's simply going to access the UI.subscript text. .text is going to be equals to, first of all, we need to check if we are reading the subscript. If that's the case, then the text is going to be active page .text. And if we are not reading the subscript, then the text is going to be simply just an empty string. And that is all we need to do. So let's collapse this method. And the last thing that we need to do inside of the next method, we need to simply display the page, which is going to be the current page. Alright, so let's copy this entire thing. Let's paste it inside of the previous method. And the only thing that we need to change is, instead of adding 1 to the current page, we need to remove 1 from the current page. So we need to go backwards. Alright, so what we can actually do is, considering that we are completely copying this entire thing and we are repeating this entire thing in both methods, we can simply just copy this. Let's remove this from the next method, and let's simply go into display page method, and let's simply paste it in here. And what we can actually do is we can simply say if active node.pages.page .type is not equals to texture, then we are going to simply do this check. Alright, so let's collapse this method, and let's collapse these methods, and let's create now the read method. The only thing that we need to do is we need to say reading, or read subscript is going to be equals to the opposite state of the current state. And what we need to do then is we need to update the subscript, and we simply need to update the UI. And that is all we need to do. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to subscribe to this action, a method. And let's go into the Unity default methods. And inside of the onEnable, let's simply say that this action that we want to subscribe the display node method to this action. And inside of the onDisable, we simply want to unsubscribe. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a couple of methods. So let's create a public static void, which we can call something like display. And in this method, we need to send the node as a parameter. And what we need to do is we need to simply just call this action, and we need to send in this node as an argument. Is we can create another method, which is going to be the overload. And this method is also going to be called display. But instead of the node as a parameter, what we can actually send is we can send the key of the node. So what we need to do in this method is simply, first of all, get the node. So we're going to call this method, which is going to be called something like get node. And we are going to send the key of the node. And after we got the node, we are simply going to call this action, and we are going to send this node as a parameter. So of course, we need to implement this get node method. So let's go here and let's create a public static method that will return node. And let's call this something like get node. And as an argument, we need to send the key of the node. So this is going to be really simple. The only thing that we need to do is we need to say if nodes dictionary dot contains key, and we are going to send the key that we send as a parameter. And if that's the case, if the node's dictionary contains that key, that means that we can return that node. Then we can simply say to return that node. But if that's not the case, if the key does not exist, then we can simply say that we want to return nothing. And while we're at it, let's create another public static method that we can call something like add node. And as an argument, we need 2, which is going to be the key and the node itself. And what we're going to do is we're going to check if the node's dictionary does not contain this new node key. Then let's simply say that we want to add this brand new node to the dictionary. And that is all we need to do. So let's go to the display methods, and as you can see, it does not complain. And now we are simply getting the node, and we are displaying this node as we should. So let's simply collapse these methods, and we are done. Alright, so what we need to do now is we need to add the audio to the node system. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a new private method, which is going to be called play sound. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to send in as an argument the audio clip. And what we're going to do inside of this method is simply say if clip is not equals to null. Alright, so if that's the case, then what we need to do is we need to say sources, and we are going to use the first source for the sound effects, and we are going to use the second source for the music or like narration. So if the clip is not equals to null, then we are going to say sources dot play one shot, and what we need to do is we simply need to send the clip as a parameter. What we also need to do is we need to create an overload of this method, and as an argument we need to send the array of audio clips. So let's simply say array of audio clips, and if clips is not equals to null, what we are going to do is first of all we are going to get the random sound effect, and we are simply going to say clips, and the index that we are going to use is going to be unity engine dot random dot range, and we are going to go from 0 to the length of the array. And once we got the random sound effect, we are simply going to say sources dot play one shot, and we are simply going to send in the sound effect as a parameter. And that is all we need to do. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a brand new method, and this method is going to be called whenever we're going to close the node. So let's simply go here and let's create a brand new. So let's go here and let's create a brand new public, and this method is going to be called whenever we are going to press close button. So it's going to close the actual node. So let's create a brand new method that we can call something like close node, and this method is going to have a single parameter, which is going to be the Boolean state, and this is going to be called something like play sound effect. And the reason why we need this is at the start of the game we are going to close everything automatically, but we don't want to play the sound at the start of the game. We only want to play the sound if we are pressing the close button manually. So we need to kind of determine if this sound effect needs to be played. So the first thing that we need to do inside of this method is we need to check if play sound effect is equals to true. If that's the case, we simply need to say play sound, and as a parameter, as a clip, we need to send the close node sound effect. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to update the canvas group, which is going to be the state false, and the canvas group is going to be the UI.node canvas group. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to create this method that will reset all of the data to the default data whenever we're going to close the node. So let's call this method something like on node close. Let's go here and let's create a brand new private method on node close. And inside of this method, the only thing that we are going to do is we are going to reset some of the values. The first thing that we need to do is we need to say that the active node is going to be equals to null. The current page is going to be equals to 0. The read subscript is going to be equals to false. And the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to say that the sources dot one, which is the narration source, we are going to stop playing the sound. Alright, so let's go back to the close method. And what we need to do here is we need to close the node. So let's simply call a close node method. And what we need to do is we need to send the boolean, which is if we want to play the sound effect. And what we actually need to do is we need to make this method also contain this parameter. So let's simply say boolean play sound effect, and whatever we're going to send into this whenever we're going to call this method, this is what we are going to send whenever we're going to close the node. All right, so let's go back now to the display node method, and in here we are going to play the sound effect, which is going to be the open node sound effect. All right, so now inside of the display page method, what we need to do is we need to first of all say sources dot second source dot stop. So we need to stop playing the narration, and what we need to do here is we need to check if this page needs to play the narration, and if it contains any narration, then we are going to well, play that narration. So what we need to do first is we need to check if active node dot pages and the current page dot narration, if it's not equals to null, we are going to do another check. So what we are going to do here is we are going to check if we haven't played the narration yet. If that's the case, then we're going to say sources, the second source dot clip is going to be equals to active node dot pages dot narration, and then we're simply going to play that narration. And what we need to do afterwards is we need to check if this narration needs to be played only once. So let's simply check if active node dot pages dot narration play once. If that's the case, let's simply say that the active node dot pages dot narration played equals to true. So that will make sure that the next time we are going to display this page, this code is not going to be executed because we already played the narration. Alright, so let's go back to the next and previous methods. And what we need to do here is we need to play also the sound. And the sound that we need to play is going to be the turn page sound effects. So we are simply going to play the random turn page sound effect. So let's copy this and let's paste this into the previous method. Alright, so the last thing that we need to do is we need to go back to the Unity's default methods, and at the start of the game, at the start method, we need to call close method, and we don't want to play any sound effect. Then what we need to do is we need to say that the default page texture needs to be equals to the UI.page.sprite. Alright, and this is all we need to do inside of the start method. So now let's go back to the update method, and the only thing that we are going to do inside of this method is we are simply going to check if we pressed the tab button. So let's simply say if input.get key down, and the key that we are going to use is going to be keycode.tab. So if we pressed the tab key, what we need to do first is we need to say using a node's system is going to be equals to the opposite state of the current using node's system state. Then afterwards, we simply need to do the switch statement, and we need to switch the using node's system. So if we are using the node's system, then we're simply going to open the node's system. But if we are not using the node's system, we're simply going to call close method, and as a parameter, we simply need to check if active node is not equals to null. If it's not equals to null, then we are going to play the sound effect, and if it's equals to null, we are not going to play any sound effect. Alright, and this is all we need to do. Alright, so I'm pretty sure that we are already done with our nodes system. So let's go back to Unity. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to go to the nodes system, and we need to drag and drop our nodes system script onto this game object. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to reference all of these UI references. So the first thing we need to reference is the text object, and the text object is inside here, which is the text. Then what we need to do is we need to reference the subscript, and the subscript is going to be this one. Then what we need to do is we need to reference the subscript group, which is going to be this one. Then we need a page, which is going to be this one. Then we need to reference the lines, which is going to be this one. Then we need to reference the node and the list canvas groups. The node is this one, and the list is this one. Then what we need to do is we need to reference all of the buttons, and the buttons are here. So let's simply drag and drop the read button. Then let's do the same with the next button, as well as with the previous button. And we also need the node data prefab, which we have in the prefabs folder. And we currently haven't attached the node data script onto this prefab. So let's open this prefab. Let's go into the scripts folder, and let's drag and drop the node data script onto this object. And we need to reference a couple of references. The first one is the background, which is going to be this one, and the next one is the label, which is going to be this one. Alright, so after we configured everything, let's simply exit, and let's go back to the nodes system. And now we can simply go into the prefabs folder, and we can drag and drop this prefab, and we can reference it. The last thing that we need to reference is going to be the list rectangle, and the list rectangle is going to be this game object, and that is all we need to do. So now the next thing we need to do is we need to set color 1 and color 2. Alright, so let's set the first color to be 20, and let's set the second color to be 15. Of course, you can select any color you prefer, but then the next thing we need to do is we need to reference two audio sources. But before we can do that, we need to add the component, which is going to be audio source, and let's add another audio source. Alright, so after we added both of these components, let's simply drag and drop and reference both of these audio sources. And the next thing we need to do is we need to reference all of the audio clips I already prepared. So if you're going to get all of the source files, you're also going to get, of course, all of the audio clips. So let's simply drag and drop and reference all of the audio clips. Alright, so that is all we need to do. So what we need to do now is we need to go back to the UI system, and what we need to do here is we need to add a couple of on-click events. So let's select the close button, and let's add a brand new on-click event. Let's reference the nodes system, and whenever we're going to press on this close button, we are going to call this close method. And of course, we want to play the sound effect, so let's simply select this. Then let's select the read button. Let's also add the brand new on-click event. And whenever we're going to press on this button, we are going to invoke the read method. Let's select these two buttons, which is the next and the previous buttons. Whenever we're going to press on the next button, we are of course going to call this next method. And whenever we are going to press on this previous button, we are going to call this previous method. Alright, so I think this is all we need to do. So what we need to do now is we actually need to create a couple of pickups so that we can actually pick up a couple of nodes and we can actually add them to the list and then read them.